So hello, family. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to my adopted hometown, Sweet Home, Chicago. We've got a lot of talent in this town, like our opening musical act, Ricky Dillard, who I've known for many years, and the new G. Wow, was that some opener. And now it's my honor to introduce the speakers for our opening plenary entitled Change Agents, and we all know that well. CDFIs were founded by agents of change, men and women who were dogged in their pursuit of equity and justice. Like many of you, my team and I are extremely proud that our fund was also created by such passionate visionaries. And I think that one of those passionate visionaries for the Chicago Community Loan Fund, Kathy Tholand, is in the room with us this morning. Kathy, where are you? I need for you to stand up and be seen, please. Where are you? Let's all give Kathy Tholand, the visionary behind our organization, a big round of applause. I can't see you with the lights, Kathy, but thank you for being with us and standing strong and driving us this far for 30 years. We are about to hear from three inspiring individuals, each one a change agent in their own right. Their stories span 6 decades, bringing to life the critical issues of the 1960s and 70s and confronting head-on one of America's greatest challenges of today. Each speaker will take the stage in turn and share their stories and shift your thinking. These change agents understand that transformation often comes from playing outside of conventional margins. I think you'll find their stories bring that idea to life. First, we'll hear from Jim Capraro. I met Jim when I came back to Chicago over 23 years ago. I was learning from him then, I'm learning from him now. Jim brings 40 years of community organizing and development experience to his work. In the early 1970s, he worked as a community organizer pursuing the passage of the Home Mortgage Act, better known as HMDA. He also worked to pass the Community Reinvestment Act, and we all know that that's a huge issue of today. Jim has worked on comprehensive community development, strategic planning, community organizing, collaboration and partnership, and nonprofit management. You may recognize Jim as the CEO of Greater Southwest Development Corporation, one of the longest standing economic development, community development corporations in the region. So let's welcome Jim Capraro.
It's 1971. 1971, I was 21 years old. Picture me 35 pounds lighter. I had hair, proud to be a hippie and an anti-war organizer. We won't talk about the Grateful Dead. But those locks were shorn in 1971 when I transitioned to community organizing. In 1971, Emily Thomas, an age 50-something Irish public school teacher in Chicago, and a board member of the Southwest Community Congress, where I worked, walked into a board meeting and told a story that would redirect my life. She had just come from the savings and loan where she had banked for 25 years. Her salary and her husband's union job, coupled with their frugality, allowed them to build up their savings and pay down over 20 years of their 30-year mortgage note. She assumed there would be no problem purchasing a second house on her block, located just 5 blocks away from where she was sitting with that loan officer. As luck would have it, a deluxe Chicago bungalow on her block, the same home her daughter fell in love with as a little girl so many years ago, was up for sale. Emily and her husband, Jack, intended to give the young couple a super wedding present, a home of their own, the American dream. Emily had already put up the earnest money and signed a real estate contract. That afternoon, Emily, Jack, and the young couple went to their trusty S&L, Savings and Loan, to secure the financing. She took great care to explain that both couples were buying the home together. Emily and Jack would withdraw the savings to pay the 20% down payment, and they would co-sign the mortgage note with the younger couple. She expected to walk out of that S&L with a verbal commitment, contingent on a home inspection and home appraisal. After all, for 20-plus years, she and Jack had never, ever been late on a mortgage payment. That evening, when I saw Emily, when she walked into the board meeting, she was feeling dejected, and she was angry. The response from the S&L loan officer, we're not lending east of Western Avenue. It's now an FHA neighborhood. If you were to purchase west of Western Avenue, we'd be happy to take your application. As Emily told her story, we really didn't know what was going on, but we knew it did not feel right. What is an FHA neighborhood? Never heard of that before. The odd thing was the statement about Western Avenue. Emily's block was 2 streets east of Western Avenue. We asked ourselves, what's the difference? What's the difference between the blocks east of Western and 2 blocks west of Western Avenue? Literally 4 blocks apart. As we examined this question, we concluded there wasn't much difference. We actually aborted our agenda for that board meeting and just talked about this. We looked east of Western, we looked west of Western, and as we talked, we said, wow, same schools, same churches, same retail corridor, same access to employment, same parks, same recreation, same healthcare provider, Holy Cross Hospital. The anchor institution that Senator Durbin talked about was 4 blocks away. Everything was the same, except one thing. There was only one difference we could identify. In the past year or two, Emily's block and the blocks around it to the east of Western had just received some new neighbors. These new neighbors just happened to be African American. The only difference we could identify was race. So our community organization went to work. We sought a meeting with the S&L and they refused, as did other local financial institutions. We started bringing a mixed race crowd of a couple of hundred people, neighborhood people, to their lobbies every Saturday. Sometimes our folks would open new accounts and then immediately close them, jamming up the teller lines. Let me tell you what happened the first time we went to that savings and loan. It was called Chicago Savings and Loan. The first time we went, we had over 200 people in a not very big lobby. There was, shoulder to shoulder, and we went in and we demanded a meeting with the CEO of that savings and loan, who was upstairs, and he refused to come down. Now, we were kind of young and dumb, and so we're all there, and what do we do? What do we do now? He's not coming down. And we kind of thought, well, we own the place because nobody can get in the front door, or nobody can get down the staircase because we're so crowded. And so we're just all standing there, and it was a very awkward moment until a fella from the West Englewood part of our neighborhood, an African-American older man named Philip, sat down on the floor, and he started to sing. We shall overcome. And by the time people heard them, they started to sit down. And they started to sing, we shall overcome. And then everybody was sitting down, including customers who had just come to the bank to bank that day. And everybody was singing, we shall overcome someday. And the next song was, we shall not be moved. And we were not moved until the police came and actually moved us out. But that was 3 hours later, and their office hours were over for that day. During the week, we would pick random hours on random days when our folks would make hundreds of phone calls, effectively jamming their switchboards. That's when you still had people plugging plugs to connect folks. When you open an account at a savings and loan, you were a co-owner. These were mutually owned associations. So we went door to door, block by block, throughout the neighborhood, getting people to revoke the proxies that they had given away when they signed the cards when they opened the account. And this forced banks and savings and loans in the neighborhood to hold their annual board meetings in public movie theaters. Marquette Theater held 995 people, and we overfilled it for the Republic Savings Board of Directors meetings. But soon, we recognized that this fight was bigger than just our neighborhood. In fact, we came to realize it was bigger than just the city of Chicago. And so we joined with other community organizations across the city and across the country to organize against lending discrimination. We gathered behind National People's Action under the leadership of a housewife and mother of 6 from the Austin community on the west side of Chicago named Gail Sincata. A tough, seasoned community warrior, Gail stewarded the national community assault against urban disinvestment. In 1973, working with the University of Chicago, a research team from U of C and National People's Action documented systematic lending discrimination in communities as they became racially diverse. When people of color moved into neighborhoods, we documented that as they came in, lending left. I worked at National People's Action then, and I was tasked with taking the University of Chicago research to newspapers. I remember sitting in a staff meeting on Division Street where we searched for a term that would brand urban disinvestment as evil. We were looking for a term analogous to racism or racist. We thought about Western Avenue and all the other similar lender map credit boundaries and imagined a red line down the middle of the street. On the right side of the line, credit is available, and on the wrong side of the line, well, no loans for you. Our vile practice moniker came by fusing 2 words together to become a new verb. This new verb, representing the reprehensible practice, was redlining. Redlining as practiced by redliners. I went off to the Chicago Tribune and met with news reporter Stan Ziemba. His 1973 piece in the Tribune disclosing the results of the University of Chicago research, I believe is the first time the word redlining ever appeared in print. So a lot has changed over the last 40 years. Okay, 45 pounds. We passed the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act in 1975 and the Community Reinvestment Act in 1977. 40 years later, we have a bona fide community development industry blessed with a robust complement of community and affordable housing developers who are knee-deep in lending partnerships. We heard about them from the podium here this morning. Knee-deep in lending partnerships with CDFIs and others that provide capital to invest in changing lives and transforming places, transforming neighborhoods. I owe an expression of gratitude to Emily Thomas. You know, the last 2 weeks has not been kind to the women of the United States of America. I want to testify. I owe Emily Thomas my deep gratitude. She did redirect my life. I've been blessed to have a wonderful career in the community development, community investment, community revitalization business. Without Emily, I'm sure I would not be here today. And we all owe, every one of us owe an expression of gratitude to Gail Sincata. Without Gail, none of us would be here today. So I would like you to rise. I would like everybody to rise. Stand up in the back, in the front, off to the left, in the middle. Rise. Let's give a standing ovation to 2 of my personal heroes, Emily Thomas and Gail Sincata. So that's my story. Thanks for listening.
I am who I am. And I don't think of myself as a change agent. I think of myself as a partner with those who are creating change for the good of their community. And here's why. I'm from the east side of Detroit, that other city over there. I was 19 years old, and I was a novice. I was preparing to become a vowed sister when the riot in Detroit happened, and I've never forgotten it. The 1967 Detroit riot was the bloodiest race riot in the long, hot summer of 1967, composed mainly of confrontations between African Americans and the police. It exploded into one of the deadliest and most destructive riots in American history, lasting 5 days and surpassing the violence and property destruction of Detroit's 1943 race riot. That event is still a touchstone for me. Our sisters had schools in Detroit and they worked in parishes, but that riot made me realize that charity is not enough. The riot was the spark that pushed me into why, and realize that systems create injustice. That racism was a system that had to be changed, and it infected everything. When my congregation, the Adrian Dominican Sisters, became involved in investing in the early 1970s, it was because we realized we would have many ill and retired sisters to care for in the future. At that time, we had about 2,000 sisters. Today, we're about 600. So that's a lot of people to take care of. And there were many tense discussions, we call it disputatio. Don't you love that word, disputatio? About caring for the poor versus caring for ourselves. I dare to say all women's religious congregations had the same discussion. It became known as mission versus maintenance. You have to understand, the bishops do not take care of us. We are financially self-supporting, and we pool our monies in a common fund to not only care for each other, but to support all our ministries. And our mission was to be co-creators of justice and peace, and that had to include how we use our money. When we established a portfolio of investments for our retirement, we actually began with challenging the corporate systems, which we continue to do today, through shareholder resolutions and voting our proxies. We joined the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, and actually this fall, one of our sisters was honored for her life's work, and she got a lot of publicity in challenging the gun companies, challenging them to say, what are you doing about gun safety? Unfortunately, the papers always look for the great headline, you know, the nun with the gun kind of thing. But we're really challenging them as our part as shareholders to deal with gun violence. So I want to ask you, if any of you have a retirement fund and you get proxies, or if you're in a mutual fund and they're voting proxies, vote your proxy. It's as important as the electoral vote. You actually have some power in the corporate system, and I ask you to use it. That is one way to create change. But we realize that's a long-term strategy. And given the social unrest and our study of social justice and systemic change, we wanted to create something more positive. So we began to use some of our money in community development. You know, it's really interesting because one of our first investments was South Shore Bank. I was pretty naive because I thought our investment in Shore Bank would show those mainstream banks that you can invest in these neighborhoods, just what Jim was talking about. And your investments would be repaid, this would be a good market, et cetera. And then the banks would do this lending and we'd move on to other areas where they were not investing. Well, from my viewpoint, banks have gone from being a service industry to a finance industry. And I see banks using loan funds as a way of doing this lending rather than doing it themselves. So we've created an alternative system for the banks, not quite the systemic change I was hoping for, but it has helped a lot of people. However, there's a lesson to be learned here. Don't be naive about the power of large institutions like banks. They will often avoid doing something risky and find a way for other people to do it for them. As an investor myself, I've always believed that money is just a resource. The real strength is in the people, those in the neighborhoods and those in the organization. And you have to have both to create change. Lending is not about leverage. It's not about safety and security. It's not about financial return. It's about helping communities thrive. And that takes people and cooperation and collaboration. So, if you say to me, well, what are your due diligence questions? Well, what do you see as a problem? How do you propose to address or solve it? If you run into problems, what will you do? How will you persevere? I'll only invest if I think you have passion, commitment, and a means to pay me back. It is a loan, Generating revenue is important, but because I've had requests and I refuse to put an organization into debt if I don't think they can pay me back. Because the goal is success. The goal is for you to thrive. Well, I lend when there's no track record, there's no equity, there's no loss reserves. Why? Because for me, a loan is a covenant. It's a promise that I am going to work with you in your community to thrive. What I'm saying to you is, I believe you have a future. It's okay if there are bumps in the road, just talk to me and we'll work it out. I can be patient, I can be flexible, and when you succeed, I'll get paid back. Have I lost money? Oh, sure. But every time I do, I think, you know what? There are people who lost jobs. There are people who lost homes. They're the ones who really lost. So, with all these years of investing, what's been the result? Well, we've invested in a lot of startups. Actually, I'm more comfortable with startups. Some of those other balance sheets are too complicated. But loan funds were started with money from socially conscious investors and faith-based investors like us. And as I said, before track records, before equity, before reserves, we were investing. In addition, we've helped nonprofit housing developers, CDCs, international microfinance institutions, daycare centers, worker co-ops, you name it, I do everything. But, you say, well, what were your results? I can't give you data because I believe what another sister, Sister Joan Chittister, said. Numbers are a capitalist answer to a gospel question. And our focus is to keep the money on the streets as long as possible. I sometimes say when I do a site visit, we used to be able to send a sister. Now we don't have somebody to send, but our money is the next best thing. So you're our co-ministers. So we want to keep it on the streets as long as we can. And you are the evidence that we've created change. And I want to tell other investors, we spent 40 years helping these folks create a track record. Now they've got equity. Now they've got loan reserves. Come on, invest in them. It's an important allocation strategy and diversification strategy for your retirement fund. Put a penny on a dollar, come on. You know, loosen those purse strings. So if any of you want me to talk to anybody, I'm available. So back to our theme about change. What have I learned about change? Number one, there's always resistance. You know, from the age of 2, every single one of us started to say, let me do it. How many of you parents out there hear this ringing in your ears, right? Let me do it. So it's wired into us. And any change strategy has to incorporate the self-determination of those who are going to be affected by the change. I really think we have to really keep those community organizing roots. We have to keep people involved in the solutions. Second, I think it's really important to be conscious of your own resistance and address it openly and honestly. Each one of us has to be willing to be changed in the process. Otherwise, it's self-interest, and folks are going to resist you even more. Third, that change has to balance resistance with common good. It has to be mutually beneficial for people and for the earth. Now, this is a new consciousness for me. The effects of our action on the earth is a growing awareness, and we in religious congregations have been studying this issue for a number of years and realize it has got to be central. Because the change we need to create has to be a bigger vision than what I had in 1967. You know, we are totally dependent on the earth for our sustenance. In reality, we're the first derivatives. So, every strategy we think of from now on better include how does this affect the earth, all species, and all people. So it's 2018, and we're in the midst of a lot of change. Not all of it our choosing, right? As a phrase I heard describes it for me, it's called paradigm squeeze. Can you feel it? I feel frustration, anger, discouragement, but I'm still hanging on to some hope and everything in between. With some of these changes, I think resistance is the fuel that increases our consciousness and moves us to action. At the same time, I want us to think really deeply about the change we want to see, because it has to involve everyone and demonstrate that it's mutually beneficial for people and planet. No more tweaking around the edges of our systems. We have to include as many diverse voices as possible to get a whole picture and changes that are much more comprehensive. So, I'm beginning to see annual reports from some of you that talk about transformation. In San Francisco, Salesforce just had a big convention about corporations being a platform for change. So the language is out there, but is the reality? Because I say to myself, are they involving the folks we work with? Are they listening to their voices? Are they thinking about the effects on the earth? Otherwise, it's not the vision I want. Otherwise, it's self-serving. And I don't think it's sustainable. Recently, Colin Kaepernick has said, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. For me, that something has to include people and planet, and it's got to be based in peace and justice for all. And where's my source of hope? Well, I'll conclude with a quote from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
y'all playing. Come on now, good morning. Now I'm Baptist, you can talk back to me. Good morning. All right, give yourselves a round of applause. Oh, you can do better than that. I said give yourselves a round of applause. Woo! I'm a little bit different. I want to thank you all for being here and for, come on, give a round of applause for all the speakers this morning. I'm the last one. You can go ahead and turn to your neighbor and say, yes. But if you lend me your ears for just a moment, just want to share a couple things with you. I was an officer in the United States Army, and I never lost a soldier. While serving, I lost a brother-in-law to gun violence in Chicago, and after leaving active duty, I came back to Chicago, and I lost a niece, cousins, students. My brother was even shot in the face, and he has a bullet that's still in his brain to this 30 years later. It should not be. This is my personal experience, and it's tough, but it's what motivates me to serve. I have lived and worked in one of the toughest communities in Chicago, Cabrini Green. It was so dangerous that the police would not even enter the buildings alone. It was so dangerous that on New Year's Eve, they would put up barriers. Those barriers were to protect people from driving through and protect them from the snipers that would shoot at the police. I had worked in youth development for 40 years because someone helped me to avoid the danger and violence of my neighborhood and gave me a chance to discover my gifts. And also because of part of what I learned in the Army and throughout my life is that you never leave a man behind. Despite the challenges and danger of the community, there were individuals and organizations that put systems in place to rescue, recover, and repair someone like me. Let's be real. It wasn't about systems. It was about relationships. Just for a moment, think to yourselves, who was that person? Who were those people in your life that took the time? Those credible messengers, those people that took the time to help you along the way. People that you believed in. People that pointed you in the right direction for services that you needed to succeed. We need that right now. Not just in Chicago, but all over this country. We need relationships between credible messengers and people most at risk. We need relationships between service providers and those most at risk. Relationships with life coaches and those most at risk. Relationships with caring adults that are willing to share their time, talent, and treasures. Because without nurturing relationships, a child is forever traumatized by the murder of a loved one, will fail in grammar school, drop out of high school, and turn to the only place where he or she feels a connection, a relationship, the streets. By a show of hands, all those that have been impacted, your lives have been shattered by gun violence, raise your hand. Not many hands went up. So think about what it's like to be at North Lawndale College Prep on the west side, where every hand goes up. Every hand goes up, and those hands stay up when you say, was it 2? Was it 3? Was it 4? Was it 5? Think about that. In 2016, Arnie Duncan pulled together returning citizens, college students, and educators. Community leaders all came together to discuss violence in Chicago. He listened, and CRED was born. I thank God to be a part of such an amazing team. Chicago CRED, creating real economic destiny. Now, this is complex work, but at its essence, it's about restoring and creating new relationships and new futures, new communities. We believe Chicago should be a safe city for everyone, regardless of race, geography, or income. We started our first cohort in September of 2016. Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, are you in the house? Come on, give them a round of applause. I heard that some of you toured Pullman. Our first cohort worked in Pullman, Roseland area because of Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. Dave Doyd and his team have been partners with us from the very beginning, offering transitional jobs for our men. Those 32 men that started with us, we're still in relationship with. We're still working with to get them to permanent employment, to work on individual counseling, group counseling, building them up so that they can be everything that they ever wanted to be. We now have partners in Inglewood, West Garfield, North Lawndale, Pullman, Roseland. We're building momentum. Our model has 3 stages: community outreach, programming and skill expansion, and workforce development. Now, here's one of the best kept secrets in Chicago. The men we work with at Chicago CRED are some of the most amazing young men you'll ever meet. They have untapped talents. They're smart, they hustle, and they have extraordinary potential. And once a guy begins to embrace that, dignity is restored. Guys who once lost hope are now inspired to give back. Construction, deconstruction, landscaping, beautification, culinary arts, feeding the homeless, giving out school supplies and backpacks, building a playground, being a part of the change. This is what happens when a community connects and relationships are established. When guys are given a chance. Actually, to be clear, for most of the men we work with, we aren't providing a second chance or a third chance. We're providing the first chance. And if you think about it, if you really think about it, there's no more sacred work than that. I want to introduce you to some young men, so please direct your attention to the video.
CRED, creating real economic destiny. Over time, they brought out the best in me till I gained the confidence that no one is best in me. On the path to building my legacy, you hear some stories for some of my brothers. Some I make you cry at night while laying in bed, knowing we put our pain in the pencil lead, and how we refuse to be a prison's pedestal, and how being in CRED makes us incredible.
Before coming to CRED, I just came out of incarceration, but before that, I was in the streets, selling drugs, doing everything you could name in the streets.
I've been as low as sleeping on trains and in abandoned cars, to selling drugs and stealing from stores, basically, just to make sure I ate.
Well, my life before CRED, I'm not gonna lie, it was one of the more rough situations I've been through in life. I was homeless for 4 years, trying to find a way to eat, taking whatever I need. I don't care what they say to me. Hey, what you doing? I need this, so I gotta have it, and I gotta take it, or else I'm not gonna make it in the world.
Before CRED, I was living street life or whatnot, doing a lot of negative things, to make ends meet, but I lived part of that life, now I'm a CRED member.
I think these stories are profound for hundreds of reasons. But the most important one is a truth that has guided me most of my life. The worst thing is never the last thing. Because here's what I know to be true, that there's always a new chapter that can be written in any of our stories. For these brothers, I think their stories in many ways are just the beginning. And here's something else I also know. Here's something else that I truly believe with everything in me, that they are too important to leave behind. And that's why for all of us, I'm confident we can play a role in writing a new chapter for Chicago. A chapter built on hope instead of fear, peace instead of violence, and it may be the best chapter yet. Come on, put your hands together and give yourselves another round of applause, because I know that you believe. Oh, come on, I know you believe. Turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, oh, y'all playing, come on now, let's go to church. Neighbor, neighbor, oh neighbor, I believe. I believe. Thank you.
Folks, I have to tell you that it is such an honor to be amongst these change agents. So we heard from my good friend, Jim Capraro, as you know, and what has Jim done? Jim has spent 40 years being on the front lines of community development and community organizing. Jim was one of the pioneers that helped many CDFIs and many CDCs embrace comprehensive community development. And we're talking industrial, we're talking retail, we're talking housing, and we're talking that policy piece. We're talking about Sister Corinne Florek with Asian Dominicans, who was the 2010 Ned Gramlich Award winner, who, as you know, has been doing community development work for 30 years and is, as you heard her talk, a fearless warrior for socially responsible investing. Oops, is that impact investing? Whatever, you know what I mean. But she was out on the front lines of that. And Craig Nash, boy, for being a survivor, to know what he has been able to persevere is truly impressive. And then to be in the service of others for over 40 years with a particular focus on our youth. And being a part of a new initiative that is working on the front lines to help our most disconnected youth and ex-offenders become people with purpose. So in Chicago, when we talk about CRED, we think about we're going to have a lot more public safety because we're on the front page and we're on the front lines with all of the gun violence. Hopefully you haven't been watching the news this week because there's still more of that out there. But what Craig is trying to do is to reach out and touch these young people and to bring them back into protective society. Not just for Chicago, folks, because if this model works, it's a national model that could make your street safer and also help thousands of youth and ex-offenders in our communities across the country have lives of purpose, and that's what it's all about. So let's give our speakers one more round of applause. So as Donna said, we will be celebrating CDFIs as change agents all week long here at the conference. So what are change agents? For me, change agents have a clear vision and work for good. Change agents persevere, and they refuse to give up in the face of great odds, and that's all of you. Change agents upend the status quo and ally with like-minded friends. Who is that? It's you, and we know it. Whether you work for a CDFI, you're a partner to a CDFI, or a CDFI borrower, you are a part of an industry that is defined by these qualities. So let's get out there and make some transformation happen. Thank you.